welcome back to the History of Christianity. Today we're going to be looking at the missions movement that takes place in the 19th and 20th centuries. Stay tuned for the PowerPoint.
Okay, class, we're going to have our PowerPoint portion of this lecture for the missions movement of the 19th and 20th century. Okay, so let's look at colonialism and missions. Some Europeans protested colonization of new lands and territories. There were always those people that were going to be protesting. They're Europeans going out and taking land and colonizing land and territories. However, most and many of them were very sincere Christians. Okay, so I don't want to sit here and demonize people, but most Christians agreed with colonization, and they thought it was good. It benefited that the Europeans could bring the gospel to the new land. So not only would money and industry and maybe less primitive ways of doing things, more civilized ways, if you want to call it that, could come to these new colonies, new lands. The Europeans also said, hey, this is a great way to bring the gospel to the heathen. So many viewed that God had given the white Europeans the gospel for the purpose of taking it to the heathens. Therefore, colonization was the way to take the Bible to the lost. So if the gospel was to go out and the Europeans had the gospel, the best way to take it out was to colonize lands. And so a movement takes place in the 19th century that involves everything from exploration to economic endeavors to industry and even missions, where it was the responsibility of Europeans to do all of these things for the colonies that they were eyeing, the lands they were eyeing to colonize. And what it's called is called white man's burden. And this is what the Europeans viewed as their responsibility. So you see a definition there. The responsibility for the Europeans to take the benefits of industrialization, capitalism, democracy, and Christianity to the world. And so they looked at this as a responsibility. We need, as Europeans, we need to take this gospel or this industry or this type of government, like democracy, we need to take this to this primitive heathen land and instill it there. So that's called white man's burden. Missionaries have been blamed for colonization, and that's not really a fair assessment because really it was the European powers that colonized. Missionaries there wasn't so many missionaries, and they definitely did not have a military arm to them to go and colonize, because many times the European powers that colonized, they also had to bring some sort of military force, or at least some security force to go into a new land, and the missionaries didn't have that. So the missionaries have been blamed for colonization. However, the European powers colonized for many reasons. Mostly it was for economic reasons or for geopolitical power plays. Geopolitical just basically means politics around a geographical area. So let's say in South Africa, the British expanded out into new colonies because of the Dutch had found gold, and the Dutch had found diamonds in portions of northern South Africa, and the British made power plays there, and they ended up taking some of those things from the Dutch, and a couple of big wars were fought. The First and Second Boer War were fought. So there's different reasons why they colonized. But as the Europeans moved into these areas, the missionaries followed along and brought the gospel. And then even at times, it was simultaneous. Sometimes as the exploration went around, or even if there was some sort of a war, the missionaries would follow right behind, and it would almost look like it was simultaneous. During the very late 18th century, and then it would explode into the 19th century, you see missionary societies start to develop to fund missionaries to go around the world. Many times they were along denominational lines. And so I just put a few here on the screen the 18th century, we have 1698, Society for Promoting Christian Knowledge. That was Anglican. 1701, Society for Propagation of the Gospel in Foreign Parts, Anglican. 1792, Particular Baptist Society for Propagating the Gospel, later called Baptist Missionary Society, and again, this is involvement with William Carey. 1795, the London Missionary Society, which is Congregationalist. 1799, the Church Missionary Society. 1804, the British and Foreign Bible Society. And then in the 19th century, which is the 1800s, you have missionary societies galore. There are so many societies and organizations popped up to support missions. The list is a mile long. What happens is you have the missionary societies, but they need support. They need money. So how do they get their money? Well, Western governments took little interest in the missions movement. They were too concerned with exploration. They were too concerned about what they could do to colonize those lands and basically get as much resources out of those lands as they possibly could. But the governments did not give money. Also, you might think churches would give money, but very few churches in Europe and in England gave money to these societies as a church. So they didn't, in their church budget, they didn't have a budget line that said give money to the London Missionary Society. They didn't have that. So churches did not give as a church. What happened was, generally speaking, individuals became interested in missions and they funded missions on their own. The people themselves, the actual individual church members, would give to a society to help fund missions work. They found it very interesting to give the support to missions, which were in exotic places, and the missionaries would send back reports to the societies, and so the members of the society who were supporting it would get these reports back from these exotic places, and it was very interesting to them, especially, for example, David Livingston and his exploration across Africa and the stories of danger. The people really loved it, and they wanted to support these missions. Many women rose up and had a great role in agency missional support, where women's agencies would support missionaries or raise funds for missionaries. And then you begin to see women becoming missionaries themselves. And at first, most women missionaries were the wives of the missionaries. So it was looked at as the husband was the missionary and the wife went along, and so she was involved in missions that way. But then in the 19th century, many women would go on the mission field to be nurses, teachers. They would care for children. So there was women themselves were then becoming missionaries to take the gospel to the world. And so you start hearing names that might, especially for Southern Baptist circles, like Lottie Moon. You hear these the stories about her. So women rose up and became very involved in missions. So we're going to look here just at a couple of areas in the world briefly. At first, so we're going to look at Asia. At first, colonial expansion was in the Indian subcontinent, which was India. So you have the East India Company, or where the British were involved there. Early on, many of the areas that were established around in Asia were Catholic, because the explorers especially from Spain and Portugal and other areas, they came around and they made these little settlements in Asia, but later they came under Protestant influence. So you have the British East India Company, which after 100 years, it basically ruled the eastern coast of India. And that was British. But then in 1858, the British government, it was an act of parliament, they took over all the area that the British East India Company had, and then over time, basically what happened was they enveloped the entire Indian subcontinent, and Queen Victoria became the Empress of India. So now you have Queen Victoria, who is the head of the Church of England, in control of the Indian subcontinent, and it becomes basically a colony of the British Empire all the way up till 1948. Okay, so we're going to look here at a very famous missionary in Asia, William Carey, 1761 to 1834. He is known as the father of modern missions. He began as an English shoemaker, and he found interest in missions after reading Captain Cook's book on his exploration of the Pacific. And again, as I said, as people hear of exploration, especially back in that time period, and they read about it, it just captured their imagination. It was just danger and exotic places and exploration, and Captain Cook was looked at as a hero. And William Carey read this book, and he just was captivated in regards to missions. In 1792, he wrote an inquiry. This is the name of the book, an inquiry into the obligation of Christians to use means for the conversion of the heathen. So that's a mouthful for a title of a book, but he wrote that book, and basically it became the way that mission should work. The book started a movement, and he and 11 others founded the Baptist Missionary Society. Within a year, he and his family went to India. They fell on hard times almost immediately, and he had to go to work in an indigo factory, and there was no real fruit of his missions. It was very hard on his wife and family. And if you read the stories of William Carey, it's just not good. His wife had a lot of problems and had a debilitating mental breakdown to where basically she almost became a huge liability for him. But things did begin to work out a little bit better when some two other missionary couples came to help him, and they became known as the Serampore Trio because they founded a missions compound in Serampore. That's an area in India, and they were called the Serampore Trio. In this compound, they had a school there that they could train and teach the indigenous people. The gospel spread, converts were made, there was translation work. Carey did a lot of translation work. With the rise of mission awareness going on in the 19th century, because he was very early 19th century, and interest in 19th century missions, Carey's mission became well known, and a contagious movement occurred around the world. That's why he was known as the father of modern missions, because the stories that he had to deal with in India, it just caught the people's attention, and they really saw a need to take the missions around the world. So that's in Asia, and we don't have time to talk about all the other areas such as China or Japan or any of that, but that's good for Asia when we looked at India. Now we're going to look at Africa. At the start of the 19th century, there were very few inroads into Africa. It was called the Dark Continent because they had never really penetrated, Europeans had never really penetrated into the interior of Africa. And the Portuguese, which had Angola and Mozambique, they really did not expand inland. They had areas on the coast that they had settled, but they did not go inland. The same thing with the Dutch in the Cape of Good Hope down there, basically you would say is South Africa. They also did not go into the interior. It was basically coastal settlements. Sierra Leone was founded for freed British slaves. And again, the British weren't really involved in that. They just basically took the freed British slaves and put them there so they could have their own country, Sierra Leone. And then, which I had mentioned Liberia in a previous PowerPoint, Liberia is right next to Sierra Leone. So that would be later on in the 19th century. So colonization was slow at first. The British, they ended up taking the Cape from the Dutch, and the penetration to the interior, it was almost non-existent. Until we have 1867, where diamonds were discovered in South Africa. And there's a very large diamond mine there called De Beers Diamond Mines. It's still around today, and a lot of diamonds that are in jewelry stores have been mined in De Beers. And when this happened, now it's a little further in the interior of South Africa, the Europeans really started looking at Africa as a place that they can get resources and get wealth. And so when diamonds were found, there's probably gold there and just different ways that we can take from Africa to make ourselves richer. And so what happens is there's this movement called the Scramble for Africa. And it was the division of Africa by European claims between the 1880s and the start of World War I. And so there's this conference that's held in Berlin in the 1880s that they basically got a big map out. The European powers got together in Berlin and got a big map out and started to just basically carve up Africa amongst themselves of who's going to rule what. And so the Europeans go in and they basically colonize all of Africa, except Ethiopia. That's the only one that really has never been colonized. So you have the European powers coming into Africa. Africa then, as the European powers have this great interest in Africa, it becomes a missionary activity focal point. Catholic European powers had Catholic colonies and Catholic missionaries went in. Protestant European powers had Protestant colonies and Protestant missionaries went in. Now, I don't want to make it sound like there was not a mix. Of course, in Protestant colonies, there were some Catholics and vice versa. Most colonies did have a mix, but usually it was the European powers' main religion that was the missionary that went in to that colony. Here's a picture of this guy here. His name is Cecil Rhodes, and at one time there was a country in Africa called Rhodesia named after him, but he was very influential in Great Britain for trying to unite the British colonies in Africa from the north to the south. And so you have his foot down there on the Cape at the very bottom of South Africa, and then his other foot all the way up there in Egypt. And I have another map coming up, but basically the British basically wanted to get control of the entire length of Africa. So this is a picture of Great Britain standing over the continent of Africa. So here's 1880. So this is before the conference to carve up Africa. So over here on the left, you see all these little cities, states, all these little states here. And these are all just indigenous peoples and the natives of the land. A few colonies. So you have like French Algeria, Morocco, down here British Cape Colony. Okay, so you have all these different little areas that are basically just indigenous peoples. But then in 1913, so right before World War I, now you see who owns what. And so these are the colors. So the United Kingdom or Great Britain, they own the pink. And that's where that picture was here with Cecil Rhodes from the north to the south. You have from the north up here in Egypt all the way to the south. And they almost had an entire line of British colonies. It's just that right here, Germany had an empire, a colony. Right there. So you see the German Empire is the olive green, Belgium, this is the Belgian Congo, this purple area, France, which they own a lot of the Sahara. You just have the different ones, Portugal, Spain, Italy, they're kind of all around. So you see how the European powers have basically just carved up Africa to be able to colonize. So what happens is the missionaries then come in. Well, we can't talk about Africa without talking about David Livingstone, 1813 to 1873. He's a very famous missionary and explorer of Africa. He was Scottish, and he came to the northern frontier of South Africa in 1841. I'm going to go back to that map. Livingstone, see down here where my arrow's going back and forth? Livingstone came into this area as a missionary, but then he would go up and explore up in here, okay, as an explorer. So he serves as a missionary. He served with a man named Robert Moffat, who had already established a mission station among the Bantus. And the Bantus are, that's actually a language. It's indigenous people that speak that language. So Moffat was there ministering with his family and at a mission station, and David Livingstone comes and joins him to work there. He ends up falling in love with Moffat's daughter and marries her. So now Robert Moffat, he himself is a pretty formidable name in missions in South Africa. Well, now David Livingstone's his son-in-law, and they move out of the mission station and they begin to take journeys north on mission activity. And he would take his wife with him, and then as their family grew, he would also take his family. And it was very difficult. It was hard. This is penetrating into Africa, so it's very difficult kind of journeys. There's disease, there's danger, there's animals, there's tribes that might not be friendly. And this is a quote by a woman named Ruth Tucker. She wrote a book on missions, and I just found this quote very interesting. On September 15th, 1851, a month after departure, Mary, that's Livingstone's wife, Mary delivered her fifth child on the Zuga River, an event to which Livingstone devoted only one line in his journal, leaving more space for his exciting discovery of crocodile eggs. Apparently ignoring his own culpability, Livingstone bemoaned his wife's frequent pregnancies, comparing the results to the output of the great Irish manufactory. Okay, so Ruth Tucker, she wrote a book that it actually has a lot of little vignettes of a lot of missionaries, and she put that in the book from the journal of Livingstone. And I just find it kind of funny that he takes his family and children and all that on his journeys with him, and he's too busy writing about crocodile eggs to even give much space to the birth of their child. And then he kind of blames her for being pregnant all the time. So it's just kind of a way that he looked at his responsibility to take the gospel and missions and even to the point of exploration of the interior of Africa. And he ends up kind of being not so kind to his wife and children. In fact, as the exploration continues on, he ends up sending his wife and children back to London so that he can go and explore on his own. So he has this great interest in exploration. He sends his family back to London, and he has several expeditions that crossed Africa, opening up the interior of Africa for more exploration, but also for missions. He was the one that discovered Victoria Falls, which is that gigantic waterfall there. He named it after Queen Victoria. While on a journey, he went missing for 6 years, and everyone thought that he was dead. But an American journalist named Henry Morton Stanley went out in search for him, and so he went and tried to follow the way that Livingstone had gone and to try to find him. And he did find him. Upon finding him, he stated that famous phrase, "Dr. Livingstone, I presume." And Livingstone's simple reply is yes. So he finds Livingstone, and what happens is these stories of danger and adventure, they come back. They're coming back to America. They're going into London. They're going back into Europe. They just fueled this exploration and missions for Africa. David Livingstone died in Zambia, Africa, of malaria, and after he died, he has some people with him, his aides, and they cut his heart out and bury it under a tree, and then his body was taken back to London, and it's actually buried in Westminster Abbey. Moffat outlived him and attended his funeral of his son-in-law in London. So here's some pictures. On the left, you see this lion attacking Livingstone, and you see the indigenous tribal people in the background. And these kind of stories would come back, and they'd be published in the newspaper. These graphic images of a lion attacking, and it was just adventurous, and people really liked this. And this is attached to missions, and so people really wanted to be involved in either become a missionary or to support missionaries. And then this is a map on the right. You can just see the red lines. This is his exploration across interior Africa, going back and forth and up and down. And so he really started penetrating the interior of Africa. Here's a meeting with Stanley and Livingston. Again, this is just artwork, but this is where when he finds him. Okay, now we're going to just switch to the other side of the world, or the other side of the Atlantic, and look at South America. The colonies in South America were predominantly Catholic. If European Protestant missionaries went to South America as missionaries, they would basically be inferring that Catholics were not Christians. Like the area of South America is mainly Catholic, and if missionaries go there, then that means the missionaries are trying to save them. And it was basically saying, hey, Catholics, you're not saved. Well, most of the people in Europe, they were not willing to take that stance. They didn't want to go there and say, we need to save you because you're Catholic. So, and that really happened, especially among the Anglicans and Episcopalians, which are considered Protestant denominations, but they are very Catholic-like. However, in the 20th century, Protestant missions did start to make inroads into South America. So there would be missionaries in the cities. There would be missionaries amongst the indigenous peoples. There would be missionaries going out in the jungles. There would be missionaries on the Amazon. So this is where you think of like the missionaries on their houseboats going up and down the Amazon, which became a very big movement in the 1950s, where a lot of missionaries came into like Peru and Brazil along the Amazon River. There was missional aviation. So with the birth of the airplane and as the 20th century continued on, you'd have missional aviation where airplanes would fly over the jungle and be able to reach areas that maybe there were no roads to. There were missionaries dealing with in education, with medicine, church planting. So once the 20th century got going, the missions in the 20th century really started making inroads into South America. A lot of focus came on mission activity in South America, regardless of whether the Catholic Church was there or not. Protestants went in and really made a footprint for missions. So to close out this PowerPoint portion here, we're going to talk about Operation Alka, January 1956. You may know this story, but this is where 5 evangelical missionaries' families from the United States moved to Ecuador to minister, or at least try to make contact with a very primitive indigenous Indian group called the Alkas. And these missionaries, the missionary husbands were Jim Elliott, Nate Saint, who was a missionary pilot, Ed McCauley, Peter Fleming, and Roger Yerdarian. These men, they went there, they took their whole families there to Ecuador to reach the primitive Indian group that had never been contacted before. So what happens is after they located the group from the air, they were flying over and they finally spotted a little village way out in the middle of the jungle with no roads to it or anything. These are unreached peoples. They dropped gifts for several months, and it looked like things were progressing. So on January 3rd, 1956, they established a base camp on a sandbar of a river near the village. And so they land the little plane. It was a yellow airplane. They land the little plane. They set up a little base camp. And on January 6th to the 7th, they made initial contact. Some people came out. Some of the Alkas came out of the jungle, and they met with them, and they ate together. So they finally made this contact. Here's a picture of these guys, so you can see what they kind of look like. Jim Elliott here in the center, he was kind of like the leader of the group, but they were all missionaries. Here's Nate Saint, he was the pilot. So on January 8th, the Alkas came out of the jungle, and they thought everything was going to be fine. The missionaries thought everything was going to be fine, but they came out of the jungle, and they attacked the men, and they killed all 5 missionaries. And a rescue mission took place once they were supposed to contact the base back at the base where the missionary wives were, and the the radio contact, it never happened. And so they were concerned that maybe something bad happened. So a rescue mission went out, and they found the dismantled plane on the side of the river, and they found 4 of the bodies. Macaulay's body was never found. And they identified the bodies from the wedding rings on their hands. Here's a picture on the right of Nate Saint with one of the Alkas on the sandbar, and it looks like the Alka is about to eat something there, or is eating something. And there's a little model of an airplane that Nate Saint brought with him. And then in the background is the plane itself that they ended up dismantling. And this picture was taken the day before the massacre. Well, this massacre captured the attention of the United States, especially in mission news. Again, this is the 1950s. There's a lot of interest in church. Just real quick to kind of bring it into context. After World War II, a lot of soldiers came home and got married and had a lot of children, and that's called the baby boomers. And there was a big influx in church attendance and church activity during the 1950s. There's almost kind of like a little mini revival in the United States with church. And a lot of churches were founded, a lot of churches were built. And what happened was, because of this missionary massacre, it captured the attention of the United States, especially in missional news. And what happens is it fuels more missions. The churches really got behind this, and they did not die in vain. They died for the Lord. We need to take the gospel out to more people. Well, Rachel Saint, who was Nate Saint's sister, the pilot's sister, with the help of an Alka girl, she ended up returning to that tribe that killed her brother and evangelizing that tribe. And many of the people in that tribe got saved. And most of the tribe, there's, you see that last bullet point, most of the tribe accepted Christ, including those that killed the missionaries. They got saved. And on the right, you see, this is from Life magazine from 1956. And this is a picture of when the missionary wives were informed that their husbands were all dead. They had found the bodies in the river, except Macaulay's body was never found. And so these are the 5 missionary wives. My arrow is going around. So here's one, there's one, here, and here. And I believe, and you see the children. I believe one of the women was also expecting a child. So you see the women, and they're being told that their husbands were found dead, except Macaulay's body was never found. But you see, this is Life magazine. Go ye and preach the gospel. 5 do and die. So this is it captured the nation's attention. And this is our final picture here for our PowerPoint. This is Steve Saint, who was a boy back here. I think that's him right here. This little boy in this picture, I believe that is Steve Saint. That's him. And Steve Saint, he was a boy when his father was killed. He stands with this man here, and his name is Minkaya. And Minkaya was one of the Alkan Indians that killed his father. And Minkaya, he became a believer in Jesus Christ and actually went around and gave his testimony of how Christ saved him and saved many of the Indians in the tribe, even after they did this thing to kill the 5 missionaries. And Minkaya, he died in 2020, so not too long ago. He died in 2020 and entered heaven. So just a really kind of a neat story how God got the glory for the death of these 5 missionaries brought many of the people that they went to minister to Christ. And that's it for this PowerPoint. I'll see you in a second.
Okay, class, that's it for today. Next time, we're going to be looking at the Protestants in the United States. Have a great day.